The Power Moms Network, empowering moms to lift the world.
Welcome. I'm Riley Karsh.
I'm Tova Kopan.
We are thrilled to bring you the We Go Boldly podcast.
Let's talk big burning questions, life changes, and maybe a bit of personal business.
Let's be bold and brave together. Are you ready?
I am. Here comes the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to We Go Boldly, the podcast. It is still season 10. It's going to be season 10 for a while. It's good. It's a nice round number. I like it. I really like this how-to season we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
This is Riley, by the way. I always forget to introduce myself, but I'm assuming you all know who I am by now. So today we are talking about something that might come across a little dry at times, but I think is so unbelievably important. It's something we mention in almost every episode we've ever done in 10 seasons, several years now. And that is how to find a therapist. And I have big feelings about this. Tova did the research. So let's say hello to Tova before we dive in and see how she's doing today.
Yes, I think I said to Riley, this is going to be our most important episode ever and potentially the most boring.
Yeah.
But I actually don't think it's the most boring. It's actually one where I'm like, pull your car over, like get your notes out, app out, and get ready to take some notes.
It's like this is the most practical how to.
Yeah.
Practical.
Because we are constantly telling you to get a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
And yet it is such a daunting task, especially when you need a therapist, because you rarely need a therapist when things are going great and you're feeling great.
I actually, and I'm just going to dive in for a second. I actually would encourage all of us to find a therapist when we don't 100% need one, because then you have them. They're like in your pocket, part of your support group, ready to go.
Yes. And before we get started, you asked me how I am.
Yes.
I don't even know. So you're going to be listening to this in May?
I don't even know. I've lost track now.
But we are leading up to my surgery. And so I don't even know. But behind my shoulder, if you're watching on YouTube, and if you're not, why not, is a book. And it is called I'll See You in El Jubu. And it is written by our 3-time guest, Boonmi. She's amazing. The book came out on March 12th. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it at your local bookstore. Yep. If you can't find it at your local bookstore, give them a call and ask them to order it. If you can't find it at your local library, see if you can order 2 and donate it to your local library. I donated one to my kids' middle school, elementary school, local library. And then there's a teacher that actually none of my kids have had, but like in 3rd and 4th grade, they rotate a lot. So they've had her like in passing.
Sure.
And she just keeps this phenomenal library of super diverse, wonderful books. But Boonmi's book, she just got written up in The Guardian as one of the best new picture books. I mean, it's all very exciting.
Yes.
So
get it.
Yes, go get the book, read the book, celebrate the book. The pictures are gorgeous. The words are beautiful. I think what I love about a lot of the reviews are like, I'm not Nigerian and I don't have Muslims or Catholics in my family, but we can all relate to blending families and blending traditions and food being important. And so there's such an important like theme that I think so many people can relate to.
Yeah.
In the book that it doesn't matter. I guess it's like the humanity in the book.
Yeah, there's that. And then on the flip side of that, if it doesn't like match your culture or your experiences, it's such a great opportunity to introduce your kids or your community or your students, whatever, to a different world from theirs and to
Yes.
have them understand that there are other people out there who do things differently in a very cool way. So we really, really encourage you guys to go out and get this book. And if you do, make sure you tag Bonmi on social media and let her know you got it and that you love it, because she is one of our favorite people. We love her so much, clearly.
We do. We do. We have been so inspired by her, and we
Mm,
love watching her chase her dreams. And then we
yes.
love watching her see her dreams come true.
Yeah.
So it is magic. And I don't think she has done it without quite a bit of therapy, to be
Yeah.
honest. So let's talk about therapy.
Let's do it.
So we're going to talk, we do not have a definition for you. We're going to assume that you know the gist of what therapy is. I guess we could start with a brief discussion. It's not in the outline, but about the differences between therapy and life coaching.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea.
Yeah, because we're life coaches, and we're
Yeah.
actually life coaches with psychology degrees. And so you're like, hey, what's the difference? And so I'm going to scroll down in my outline here, because one thing that's really important about what makes a therapist as a therapist is therapists are licensed, right? And so here's something that you need to make sure you're looking for when you're looking for a therapist. And we are going to talk about like where you find that list of therapists. But someone's referring a therapist to you, they might be referring a life coach to you and you don't realize it. Now, Riley and I, before we hit the record button, we were actually talking about, whether it's time for one or both of us to, reconnect with life coaches in our lives.
Yeah.
And so there are definitely time and places. Wow, this is going to be a long show if I can't, work on speaking better.
Sorry, we'll get there. We'll get there. Got it.
For life coaches. And I love the tag team in my life when I'm having a therapist and a life coach.
Yep.
But you really want to make sure, if you are looking for a therapist, that you have a licensed therapist and that they meet the state qualifications. And different states have different qualifications, but in general, they're going to be the same, right? They have passed some sort of licensing test. They have passed a background check. They have a certain number of supervised hours, and they're maintaining a certain number of continuing education credits. You may see life coaches with certifications, and those can be great. Those can mean that they have learned certain techniques. They've learned a variety of things, but
Right.
they are never required in order to be a life coach. You may have a life coach that just has a lot of experience. They are psychology majors. They were
Right.
lawyers. They have law degrees, hint, hint, like us. And they don't have a specific certificate that has said they went through a life coach program.
Right.
But therapists do have to have, certain qualifications in order to be therapists.
Right. Yeah. And there's like certain degrees, higher education degrees required in order to get those certifications. And a lot of background work goes into becoming a therapist. So those are things to pay attention to when you're searching for somebody. So where do we want to dive in here, Tova? Are we starting?
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, I think one of the reasons, why are we even having a how to find a therapist is because it's hard to find a therapist.
Yeah.
It was hard to find a therapist before 2020. It is significantly harder after 2020, because the pandemic left a lot of people in a mental health crisis.
Yep.
And so it is not easy. It is not easy navigating the financial aspects, and we're going to talk about that. It is not easy navigating, well, what kind of therapy am I looking for? What questions should I be asking?
Right.
Where do I go to find a therapist? In a poll of mental health and substance abuse workers conducted just earlier, I believe it was in 2023, 90% of the workers surveyed expressed concern that new patients won't be able to access care. And more than half of the providers who work directly with clients say their waitlist for new clients is longer than it's ever been before. And so that is rough, right? So, and that is one of the reasons, as Riley said, you may want to start looking, maybe you're in a good place. Maybe you got through your last difficult, rough patch without going to a therapist. But it's a cycle and it's going to come back around again. And you think it would be helpful to have a therapist in place, get on that wait list, like do the work now. According to a 2022 Healthline survey on online therapy, which we're going to talk about a bit, 52% of respondents found a therapist that made them feel safe and comfortable on the first try. However, 48% said it took 2 or more therapists before they found one that fit their needs. So that's the other thing, that you may not find a therapist the very first time you meet somebody. And so it can be a process, and you don't want to be so desperate to talk to somebody that you're stuck in a situation that you don't want to be.
Yeah. I mean, from personal experience, when I finally decided that I needed therapy, sometime in my 20s, I think, I went through a host of different therapists before there was somebody I was even willing to be honest with, right? And to be clear, therapy doesn't work if you're not honest about whatever's going on with you. And I think I went through 5 or 6 people before I was like, okay, well, I can trust you just like a hair
Yeah.
and have a real conversation with you. And that is not particularly uncommon or unique to me. Like, yeah, I was in a weird headspace and it made it harder and all of this stuff, but you have to find somebody that you can mesh with, that you can converse with, that you can be honest with and share, because therapy is not typically about stuff that's easy to talk about, right? It's like whatever is going on with you is something that's hard for you. And being able to talk about that openly and honestly with somebody is essential to the process.
Yeah, 100%. And so, even when, the financial aspect is something that we're going to talk about, but even when you find somebody, you find somebody you like, they said another study showed that 53% of Americans in therapy found that over a 3-month time period, that when they were looking for in-network providers, 30% encountered a lack of availability or flexibility. So maybe you find somebody you like and you can't schedule them when you want to schedule them. 27% had difficulty finding a provider who was taking new patients. And then 24% had difficulty finding someone with in-network benefits, right? So, and I think 24% is probably a low number, to be
I think
perfectly
all of
honest.
those are low based on my own personal experience over the last few years.
So that's really why we're having this conversation.
Yeah.
And then to highlight what you were saying about finding someone where there's just a smidge where you're like, maybe I can share with you what I'm feeling.
Right.
There is a phrase called therapeutic alliance. And this was the first time I heard this phrase, and I love it so much. And part of it is because of that, that it's not a meme, but there's that, do you want to build an alliance with me? Yes, yes. From TikTok or whatever.
Yeah.
And now that will be in my head forever with this in mind. But Edward Borden was one of the first researchers to examine the effect of what they call therapeutic alliance. And it is not just a made-up bond between a therapist and a patient, but it is a true bond where there is an agreement on goals and the methods to reach those goals, and then also the relationship between the therapist and the patient. So they like each other. And I don't mean they just hey, we both like the same, the Eagles, woohoo, go Birds, but they have the same communication technique, or they have a good communication. They figured it out together. You all listen to Chelsea Caldwell talk about how she has figured out communication with her husband. They've figured out their communication style. That's something we're going to talk about. It's really important. And you are allowed as a patient to advocate for your preferred, communication style. You're allowed to say to your therapist, at the end of this, I need you to give me a couple things that I'm supposed to do this week.
Right.
Like, I know you give me some ideas throughout the session, but I'm not going to remember them unless I write them down at the end.
Yeah.
Something like that. Or like, I'm not going to be taking notes this whole session. So we need to stop with 5 minutes left so you can tell me what to do. You're allowed to advocate for yourself like that.
Yeah. I just want to note too that that can change over time, right? Like you may
Yes.
start out with a therapist in the beginning and it's just a complete brain dump and you're just venting and getting things off your chest. And it might be 4, 6, a year, whatever into therapy. And you're like, no, wait, I really need some concrete tools to use. Like, what are the methods we're going to use to deal with these feelings? So it can change over time. But like Tova's saying, you have to be willing to say, this is what I need. This is what I'm here for. I need you to do this for me. Because it really is your time with the therapist. Now, you also have to build, like you were saying, Tova, that relationship and be able to trust that person and feel comfortable with them. And we'll get into like a whole bunch of that in a second. Um, so it's a little chicken and the egg. Like if you don't have that relationship,
Yeah.
then nothing else is going to work. But you also have to be willing to speak up and say things in order to build that relationship.
Yeah. I mean, some of it is going to be like, some of it's going to fall on you and some of it falls on the therapist.
Yeah.
Right. And so, to a certain extent, you have to take ownership of your therapy. And we're going to talk about what that looks like. Obviously, they are the professionals,
Right.
but you are allowed to advocate for what you need. It's good practice to advocate for what you need. But they really found that the type of therapy, right? So whether you do cognitive behavioral therapy or psychodynamic therapy or whatever the type of therapy you're doing is less important than how, as to the effectiveness, than what the relationship that you have with the therapist. So how strong is that therapeutic alliance?
Yeah.
So that's why this is so important. And we felt like when we are constantly saying, go get a therapist, go to a therapist, maybe we should tell you how to do it because it's a
Yeah.
really hard thing to do.
Yeah. We need to take a quick break. So let's do that. And then when we come back, we're going to get into this how to find a therapist question. So we will be right back, everyone. Well, hey there, dream chaser. Are you ready to make the next 12 months of your life unforgettable? Introducing the Year of You, a groundbreaking new goal system group that's about to redefine the way we approach personal growth. Join us with a community of like minded individuals committed to unlocking their full potential. With expert guidance, personalized strategies, kind hearted accountability, and a supportive network, the Year of You is more than just a goal setting group, it's a whole movement. Don't just dream about it, achieve it. Click in the link in our show notes or go ahead and visit us at goboldlyinitiative.com/year of you to learn more today. Let's embark on a transformative journey together towards becoming the best versions we can be. The Year of You, where your goals become reality. Okay, welcome back to the show. So before the break, we were kind of filling you in on the why of finding a therapist, sort of the science behind like how it all works and all of that stuff. And now we're going to get into this nitty gritty of how to actually do the thing, right? How do you find the therapist? And there are some concrete steps you can take. One of the things you have here in your outline, which I really like, is to think about your goals ahead of time. So when you think I need a therapist, what are you hoping to gain from therapy? Do you want to vent? Do you want tools to deal with your feelings? Do you have PTSD of some kind? Do you have childhood trauma you need to deal with? Do you have phobias? Are you, struggling with things like that? Do you have issues in your personal relationships? Are you struggling with parenting? Are you struggling with parenting up? Are you
Yeah.
going through grief? Like ask yourself these questions, and if that will help you determine what kind of therapist you want to look for. And I don't just mean like what style of therapy, I mean the personality of the therapist. That will have an impact on how you deal with whatever it is you need to deal with. A couple of concrete things you can do, insurance directories, right? If you have insurance, and I hope you do, um, you can go on the website usually and search for providers by specialty, and you can search for therapists. It is a horrible process to go through. I have been through it so many times now that I'm not even going to pretend like it's fun or easy to navigate. It is there though, and you can do it. It just takes a lot of mental energy and time. Um,
Yep.
but
And
I would encourage you to do it. And then the other thing I would encourage you to do is if you find therapists in your insurance directory to then go Google those people and like find out their reviews and see what's going on with them.
yes. And one I found is the easiest way I've done it is I've actually called up my insurance company versus like going on their website, which I find to be horrible. But I've done this with different insurance companies where I've called them up and I've told them what I'm looking for, and they have sent me the list. Um, and it's still annoying because it's not necessarily the most up-to-date list, but it is, you know, better than me doing it. Like
Yeah.
it's, and you can tell them specifically what it is you're looking for. Um, it's one way to start, right? And
Yeah.
I didn't include this, and we are going to talk about the finances, but throughout, every article I read, whether it was on the American Psychology Association or Forbes or self.com or wherever I looked, it was figure out your finances. So you do need to figure out how much can you put towards this, because it is not an inconsequential amount of money. It
Yeah.
can be hundreds of dollars an hour. Sometimes it's going to be covered by insurance. Sometimes it's not. There are a variety of options. There's a variety of options to make it less expensive. And we're going to talk about those. But that is something, if you are like, I'm not going to go through my insurance, I'm going to do it private, I have the funds, that opens up a lot of doors for you. So if you're limited by insurance, I go to a therapist that I have through insurance. That does narrow your world a little bit. So, but yes, start with the insurance directory is a great place to start. Another option, if you feel comfortable, recommendations from friends. Both Riley and I were talking about this. We both feel comfortable with getting recommendations from friends. We also share a lot of personal things on a podcast.
Yeah. So it
Um,
might just be our personalities.
we are also big fans of normalizing mental health
Yeah.
and talking about mental health and sharing, recognizing that therapy is good and let's go to therapy.
Right.
So we recognize that not everybody is in that same position. Um,
And
uh,
we talked about this a little bit, Tova. I would say if you are seeking recommendations from a friend, make sure it's from a friend who aligns with your personality enough that their therapist would make sense for you. There are people who I am friends with who, if they had a therapist they loved, it would not be a good fit for me. And that is not a judgment on anyone involved in the conversation. That's just how it is. Everybody has their own unique personality. So just bear that in mind when you're getting recommendations from friends.
yeah, and also recognize that, it's okay if you don't like them.
Yeah,
Like, and their therapist they're not going to tell your friend that you don't go to them anymore. Like, just
right.
move on. It's okay. Um, you can get a referral from your doctor. Um, they usually will have a list of places to go for referrals, at least a jumping off point. So
Yep.
that can be a good place to go to get some referrals. There are online therapy platforms. So this is a variety of different websites. You could go there for, um, maybe there's a parenting platform. It could just be like it could be a Facebook group that you post in and say, hey, I'm looking for a therapist. Like, there's going to be a variety of
Yeah.
different places. There could be local resources, right? So there could be local organizations. I know like our town has a local group of parents to support kids who are special needs, but a whole spectrum of special needs. And so that would be a great group to go to and say, hey, does anyone have a recommendation for a kid's therapist or even a adult's therapist? They've got to know some.
Yeah, I would also say look around your community. Like if you are a member of a religious community, there are often support groups associated with those communities that can help with various problems, whether or I don't mean problems, struggles, right? Whether it's
Yeah.
grief or survivor guilt or PTSD or any of those things. Oftentimes, those organizations, your local JCC or your church down the street will have different groups that meet in their facilities that can become a support group for you. Um, and I think that's a great place to start, especially because the more local something is, the more likely you are to actually use it. There's one other thing that's not in your list here that I wanted to recommend, and that is if you are employed in the corporate world or um, a lot of different employers offer this opportunity, and they'll have, and I can't think of the name of what the program is right now, of course, but there are usually mental health service programs associated through your organization, whether it's through HR or through some other group within your corporation that you work at. There is typically a program that is confidential that you can access that will help. Sometimes they're only for crisis. Sometimes they're sort of a platform jumping off point where they'll help you to find the services that you need, which is great. Anyone that can help you do that in my
Yeah.
book is a plus. So I would encourage you to look into what your employer offers as a place to start at least.
Well, and if a lot of times it's like 5 sessions,
Yeah.
but that can be, enough to get rolling.
Yeah,
I
and
have,
they can recommend other people to you. If the jumping off point of 5 sessions and you're like, okay, but now what do I do? That person that you've been talking to for those 5 sessions can often recommend somebody else to you that would fit.
yeah, yeah. Um, Online therapy directories. I have used this one. I've used Psychology Today. If you go on there, and that will allow you to narrow down by health insurance as well. So you can narrow down by location, by gender, if that's important to you. And that's a conversation we're going to have in a little bit, by a variety of areas and also insurance. But American Psychological Association has a online directory, the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy, the Association of the LGBTQ plus psychiatrists. There's also a variety of mental health organizations, as you were saying, Riley, but that aren't locally
Yeah,
specific, right? So National Alliance for Eating Disorders, American Cancer Association or Society, um, Anxiety and Depression Association of America, National Center for PTSD. There's a lot of veterans groups.
yeah, I
And a
was just
lot
gonna
of
say
this
that.
is like following the chain, right? So you might start with one place and then it goes to someplace else and then it goes to someplace else. But
Yeah. Which
there's
let's
also,
note that can be super frustrating and discouraging, but we would encourage you to stick with it because as you go through the process, you're going to learn what it is that you really want, what you really
yeah.
need, and it will help you sort of process of elimination, weed out the types of therapy or the types of therapists that are not right for you.
The other thing is, if you feel comfortable, especially if you are in a dark place while you're doing this. So if you're not doing this when you're feeling good, get an accountability partner,
Yeah.
especially if the dark place is anxiety or depression, right? Like, or ADHD or really anything, any form of crisis that requires you to do
Anything.
stuff that's hard.
Even if you're
Um,
in a good place, get an
Get an
accountability partner to
accountability
help you do
partner
it.
because it's really hard to keep at it. So if you tell someone else, I'm really looking for a therapist, and feel free to ask me about it. Because I think some people might be like, oh, I don't know if I should ask them if they're doing it. And
Yeah.
I mean, I have honestly told a friend who was like, I'm working on going to see a therapist because I'm depressed. And I straight up told her, okay, I'm going to be following up with that. Like, I'm going to follow up with you. And she was like, okay. And I was like, okay. And I said, because finding a therapist is really, really hard. And scheduling appointments
Yeah.
is really, really hard in the best of times. And if you're depressed, it's that much harder.
It can be so
And
discouraging.
it is. And I mean, I told her specifically why, so she didn't feel like I was like,
Yeah.
and she could have said, like, back off, Tova, and I would
Right.
have, but I probably would have also told her husband what I was doing. Been like, just keep an eye on this. But I think that, like, you can say that to somebody. You can say, hey, I need a therapist. it's so frustrating. Can you just like check in 2 weeks? And ask. And listen, being vulnerable is hard. As we are recording this, I am currently, when you're listening to this, I will have been through surgery. My meal train might even be finished. But I am currently in the phase where I am asking people to create a meal train. I am figuring out who is coming and taking care of me and watching me while I have surgery. I'm figuring out what is it that I'm going to need to lift that's more than 5 pounds between now and the end of May. And it is very frustrating. I am tired of being vulnerable. I am tired of asking for help. I am so
Yes.
sick of it. I
Yeah.
am sick of it. I do not want to ask for help anymore. I'm just over it. Like, I am just over it. So I get it, but I can't stop asking right now because I need the help. So,
Yeah.
you know,
It's kind of like if you've had a baby and you get to that point where you're like, I can't do this, I'm going home. You're like at the end.
yeah,
It's the
yeah,
baby's coming.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Sorry.
Isn't that fun when you're like, nope, I'm done.
Yeah.
And you're like, no, it still has to come out though.
Right. Like, oh, I
Like,
quit. I'm over it.
yeah.
But
Um,
it's the same thing that you're describing, right? It's like you
yeah,
get to that point where you're just like, oh, it's enough. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about my feelings. I don't want to think about it.
yeah.
And that's a good sign, to be honest, because it means you're coming to the place where there's going to be a change or a transition or like something's about to manifest in to use the wooey words for it.
Well, good. I'll take that. I'll take
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Just another, and we're actually going to talk about some of that soon, but another place for resources, because there are so many resources, it can be overwhelming, but
Yeah.
it's a good thing now, right? It means we're normalizing mental health.
Right.
Um, Yellow Couch Collective is an online support group for Black women, Therapy for Black Girls, Black Mental Health Alliance. There's the Loveland Group, the National Asian American Pacific Islander Mental Health Association, Inclusive Therapists is an online tool for intersectional identities. We Are Native, which provides Native American youth with tools for holistic health and growth. There's Therapy for Latinx, which is a Latinx, I can't speak today, which is obviously an association for Latinx folks. Like, there's just so many options. There's
Yeah.
so many options. It
Um,
is phenomenal.
it is. One more I want to mention because I forgot about it earlier, and that is if you are a parent who is searching for a therapist for a child, don't forget your school's guidance counselors.
Yep.
Because they are a great resource. They often have lists that they can share with you of local providers to help with whatever you need help with, whether it's like, dealing with depression and anxiety, eating disorders, body dysmorphia, if it's any of those things, like they'll have something, or, if you need an executive skills coach for your ADHD child, whatever it is, they typically have great resources for you.
They also, depending on the school, depending on the guidance counselor, depending on a variety of things,
Right.
may be able to talk to your child. Like, maybe through their social emotional learning program, maybe, while you're finding a therapist, while
Yeah.
you've reached out to them for resources, they might be able to say, yeah, I'll pull them aside for a couple minutes.
Right.
Like, if you need an immediate outlet and you just need, you need to show your child that someone is listening. And I mean, I have been there and
Yep.
I have had a guidance counselor. I mean, we'll go back to the pandemic and I don't know that he would mind me saying this, but like, we were setting up therapy. We were trying to figure out what to do. And he had a guidance counselor and they walked outside with masks on. I mean, that's where we were. And they would go for a walk around the school grounds. And I don't think they chatted about anything at all. But what it did was it provided him practice so that when he did get his therapist, he was a little
Yeah.
more open to talking to them.
Right.
And it also just showed like, hey, somebody's listening. So if your kid's going to talk to the guidance counselor even more, power to you. Mine never do. But they are there. Now, some are overburdened, some have too much work, some have 18 elementary schools.
I think most of them fit into that category, but that doesn't mean they won't make the time
Yeah.
to check in with your child. So I would consider it if that's what's going on in your life. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about
Yeah.
what to look for in a therapist. Toby, you had this cool list of like questions that you want to ask about you being one who is looking for a therapist
Yeah,
would
like
want to ask.
statements or questions to ask yourself to figure out like what is important to me.
Right.
And I thought these were great because they were things that I had not thought about. I just kind of stumbled upon like who's on my insurance and has availability.
Well, I think
Those,
so much of us, like, because it is so hard, that is often what happens. However, when you start at that point where we were talking earlier about like thinking about your goals for therapy or why you even want to go to
yeah,
therapy, this is also a great place to start. You can if you're a list maker or a note taker, bullet pointer, brainstormer, whatever, I think this is a good place to start because you can just start writing things down and it'll help clarify, you know, what the issue is and where you want to go with it.
yeah, yeah, 100%. So you want a therapist to be the same gender as you, or I guess that would be, do you want a therapist to
Yeah.
be the same gender as you?
Because I have an anecdote about this. Interestingly, most people do want their therapist to be the same gender as they are. However, in my family, my husband will only talk to female therapists, and I generally go to male therapists. I don't know why. I'm just putting it out there. If anyone has an explanation on that for me, let me know.
There you go.
I don't know.
I I don't
Yeah,
know.
I know. I flabbergasted you, which is
Well, and there's no evidence to indicate that the gender makes it more
no.
better, for lack of a better.
That's the best, more better.
Yeah.
I think for me, I have had terrible experiences with some female therapists. Not all of them. There are plenty of amazing female therapists out there. Just putting that out there. But my experience when I started therapy, I was like, I'm only talking to a woman. I can't talk to a man about whatever. And it was atrocious. Like it just these were bad fits. I was not willing to participate. It was just a mess. And then I wound up going to this therapist I found, I think, by looking on my insurance. And I found this gentleman and I started talking to him. And then, I was in therapy with him for 4.5, 5 years. And it changed my life completely. But I don't know that it had anything to do with gender, as you're saying. I think it was just temperament more than anything.
Yeah. And so Psychology Today allows you to narrow down by gender. So does Good Therapy. National Queer and Trans Therapists of Color Network lets you and I don't, by the way, know how intersectional Psychology Today and Good Therapy are.
Mm.
I'm hoping at this point it is not just male and female. But I don't know.
I don't know either, but I hope so.
Yeah. So something for you to think about. Is it important to you or is it not? Another one is, do you want your therapist to be around your age? Right. And I think that this is a particularly important.
It is. So like again, when I just keep going back to when I first started in therapy, like one of the first two, I think, of the therapists I saw first were younger than me. And I was like, no, I can't. And that's my own issue and my own being judgy. And I was in my 20s and thought I knew everything. And but they were younger than me and I couldn't do it. Like I was like, you have no life experience. What am I going to talk to you about? Which was wildly
Said the
unfair.
person in her 20s.
Exactly. So you see where I was at. But the point is, like, if that's where your brain is at,
yeah,
it's not going to work. So if you are 40 or 45 like me and you go to a therapist and they're 25 and you're like, I can't talk to you about things. I could be your mother, like whatever. It's just that the process isn't going to work because you're not going to trust that person to be able to manage the environment, right? And you need the person who is doing the therapy to be able to be in charge, really.
Right. On the other hand, and I love the idea of going to someone who is older than me, with a lifetime of experience, but psychology and methods change so fast.
Yep.
That I want to make sure that they're staying on top of all the new stuff all the time.
Right.
And, you know, I've had the experience where I talked to a therapist and I've been like, oh, have you read blah, blah, blah? And they were like, no. And I'm like, why not? Like, why do I know more about this study than you do? And
Right.
so, like, do they, like, to me, it's like, I don't care what your age is. You can be young. Do you have a growth mindset?
Yeah. Well, and it's funny. So now as like a fully formed adult, right, in theory, now it's a different feeling. So now like I don't have that. Also, having gone through therapy and dealt with some of the issues that put me in that mindset, you know, a little bit has changed. But like now I could imagine what you're saying. Like they're like, I don't want to have therapy on Zoom with somebody who doesn't know how to mute, right? Like it's are you technologically savvy? Are you up on the studies? Are you aware of what's going on in the world, you know, and how it impacts all of us? I think that that's all such a good and valid point that you're making. So let's see what else. So the next question you might ask yourself is, and this is something we sort of just talked about, are you interested in a therapist with similar life experience? Do they, you know, do you need them to have any kind of shared trauma or and like you probably let's when we get to the red flags, we'll tell you you probably shouldn't know about their trauma. Um, but do you need them to have had, you know, like if you're in therapy and you're a child of divorce, do you need your therapist to have been a child of divorce so that they can, in theory, better understand what it's like to grow up in that environment? Um,
Also, like religion,
yeah,
culture, you know, if you're talking to someone and they are from a completely different culture and you're trying to explain, well, this is why my dad reacted that way. And they're like, that's totally ridiculous. That's insane. That's abusive. And you're like, literally every other man in my culture would react that exact same way.
yeah,
Now, it may be incredibly helpful for you to recognize and learn that the way your father reacted is harmful to you. Whereas if you went to somebody who had your same culture, they may normalize that behavior.
right,
On the other hand, it's really harmful it may be really harmful for someone to demonize essentially every man in your culture. Like, I don't know. Theoretically, a therapist should not make any extreme statements.
back to the red flag section.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you have to balance that, right? You have to think about what what is more important for me in this moment. And hopefully, if you're going to a therapist who is of the same culture as you, they recognize like the difference between what is acceptable and not acceptable, regardless of culture, right?
Yeah.
Like hopefully they have gone to therapy and had those conversations. Like most therapists have therapists. They ought to have therapists. They should be seeing somebody to talk about. I mean, honestly, if you're a therapist, you're hearing people's like worst experiences all the time. That is
Yeah.
trauma inducing. So you probably should have your own therapist.
Yeah. 100%. Um, Obviously, are you interested in a specific type of therapy? We are not talking a lot about the specific types of therapy because it would just be too much. But like, there's EMDR, there's cognitive behavioral therapy, there's dialectical behavior therapy. There is so many kinds of therapy.
Yeah.
So you need to figure out, is there a specific kind that you're looking for? What is that kind? And does it matter to you if they practice that kind?
Yeah, and
Um,
that's like a matter of a simple Google search for
yeah,
you. Like
yeah,
there is so much information out there about types of therapy and what they do and what they're used for that you can easily find on your own. Like you don't that's pretty easy to solve.
yeah. Do you feel strongly about the type of feedback you want to receive? And I think this is a really fascinating question that I've not thought about ever until, you know, now. But what kind of communication style do you have? And, you know, either at home or at work, and what kind of communication style are you interested in having with the therapist? Um, and like, what kind of feedback do you want from them? And what kind of feedback do you expect from them? And then, you know, that's going to lead you to, you know, asking those questions from the therapist.
Right.
Like when you're talking to them, like, what kind of feedback do you provide? Like, so first you need to figure out what you're looking for. And I think this is really important. My therapist, I have learned, has a tendency to talk less when she knows that I need to come to some conclusion on my own,
Mm,
like when I'm getting close to something. And I did not know this for a very long time because I had some very big conclusions to come to. It was related to my divorce. But obviously, if she would have told me that I was in a bad marriage prior to me figuring that out, that would not have been great for me, not have
yeah.
been great for her. And so she did not talk a lot for the first like 2 years of our therapy. It was really annoying, but I was overwhelmed, did not have time to change therapists. It was only after I came to those conclusions on my own, which she guided me to, but not really. She let me get there,
Yep.
that she talked a lot more. She talks a lot more now, but I can always tell when she is waiting for me to get to something. And I do wish I had been more proactive at the beginning. And it's really hard to do, but
So
it would have
hard.
been helpful if I would have thought about ahead of time, like, what is my communication style?
Yeah.
Um, are you looking for a specific expertise? Like, are you looking, we kind of talked about this before, but um, if it's somebody who specializes in eating disorders or religious trauma, career struggles, there are therapists who will specialize. Maybe they're associated with a specific association or they highlight that on their practice.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Like if you're struggling, say, with substance use disorder and you want to find a therapist, you want them to have expertise in that area. It's a very specific disorder and they need to know how to treat it, right? They need to know how to treat you through that process. It's not the same as going to somebody who specializes in ADHD treatment, right? Like
yeah.
those aren't the same specialties. So, and somebody might have both, like they might have expertise in both areas, but you need to sort of do some digging to find out what expertise the person has.
Yes, exactly. I thought this one was interesting. Is it important that your therapist is your intellectual equal? And I think this just goes like, do you trust the person knows as much as you do? Like, once again, when I was like, hey, have you read this book? Do you know about this? And they were like, no, I've never heard of that person before. And I was like, what now? Huh? And it was concerning. And I did not
Mm,
like that. So, they don't need to be, whatever you need them to know to make you trust them. That's what matters. That's what it needs to come down to.
yeah, you need to feel safe enough to open up. And
Yeah.
that requires trust and vulnerability. And if you're sitting there going, well, this person can't deal with this feeling, then they're not the right person for you, or they're not going to understand this experience, then that's not the right person for you.
Yes.
Even if you're objectively wrong, like,
Right.
because it's really comes down to what are you feeling in the moment.
Yes. 100%. Yeah. Um, do you define success the same way? And I think this is incredibly important. And a lot of these are, you can be objectively wrong. I
Yeah.
don't know, your idea of success, um, at the beginning could be, I want to stay in this relationship. And they could be like, this is a horrible relationship,
Right.
you know.
Right.
But if that's your goal to stay in the relationship, then that's your goal to stay in the relationship. Like, but that's an extreme example, but how are you measuring your goals? What are your goals? Do you have goals, right? Like how are you keeping track of this? You should figure out what is your goal and then discuss with your therapist or your potential therapist how they will view success of therapy. Do you only want to meet your therapist online, or do you want in person? Do you want a combo? And then can you afford your therapist? Right? I'm going to go through these a little quickly so we can keep going. So that's back to the financial questions, which are a big concern. Is your therapist flexible about scheduling? If you are easy to reach, if you can't easily reach your therapist, if they're not easy to reach, if they're not easy to schedule, you're not going to do therapy. Like, it's just as simple as that. If you can't schedule them, if you can't, get a hold of them, you're not going to go to therapy.
Right.
Um, And then this one, and we can talk a little about this in the red flags, but we can talk about it here. How important is the office setup? Like, do you feel uncomfortable when you're there? Is it hard to park? Is it hard to get there? Is that going to keep you, like, to me, it has to do with like, are there outside hindrances that are going to keep you from going there? Because if there are, maybe you don't want to
but
be
it's
there.
all, I also feel like, does the office that you're in allow you to feel comfortable enough to be open?
Yes.
And like, you will never find me laying on a couch talking to somebody about my problems. It's not, unless it's my husband. Like that's just not who I am. I'm not going to do it. It's not comfortable. I'll feel tense. I'll feel worried. I'll be like, who's looking at me? What's happening? A little insight into me right now. So like the therapists I've been to have always had a couch and a chair, right? Like, can I sit in the chair? Of course I can. And then that makes me feel more comfortable. Do you need potted plants? Do you need artwork? Like, I didn't realize I needed artwork in somebody's office before I went to a therapist that I really liked, because I needed something to look at to talk about things that were hard to talk about. Because I wasn't able to look at him. Just because you're in such a vulnerable place. Like, it was a way of, and I'm sure it was done intentionally. It was a way of allowing me to feel comfortable enough to say the things I needed to say so that we could get to the healing, right? Like, that's the point.
Exactly. So we are gonna, try to wrap this up quickly, but there's just so much to say. See,
Yeah,
it's
we
all
do
very
need to
exciting.
take another
More
break.
quick break. Okay.
Yeah. So
So we're
let's
gonna do
go
that.
ahead. We're talking over each other
So
today.
excited.
I know. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to run through some questions to ask a therapist and then get on to the red flags, which I think are probably pretty important to talk about. So we'll be right back, everyone.
Hey, pod friends, it's us again. Looking for a place to collaborate, an opportunity to share your knowledge? Have you been working so hard on a podcast, book, course, product, or retreat? Do you have insights that could light up our podcast? Well, we want to hear from you. We would love to support you in all that you are and do. Join us at Go Boldly Initiative, where we celebrate diverse perspectives and share the wisdom of our incredible community. Whether you're an expert, a hobbyist, or simply love learning, we invite you to reach out with your ideas. Visit our website at goboldlyinitiative.com/podcast guests to pitch the show or shoot us an email at hello@goboldlyinitiative.com to talk all things collaboration, advertising, and affiliation opportunities. Become part of our growing family. Let's make learning an adventure together.
All right, welcome back to the show. So before the break, we promised we would talk about this quickly, and that is, when you start seeing a therapist, there are some questions you might want to ask. I'm going to caveat this with, it is when you are starting therapy, you are probably not in the best place you've ever been in your life, and it can make it extra hard to be confident enough, comfortable enough, whatever the right words are, to ask these kinds of questions. That does not mean you shouldn't. It just is an acknowledgement of how hard it is to put yourself out there and do this. So you might want to ask if they're licensed. I mean, you should probably already know that from looking online.
I was going to say, if you can answer some of these questions by looking online, do it.
Yeah.
You could also do this in like with Psychology Today, you can email people directly. It goes into a portal. It doesn't, like, you don't get their email address because they don't want to give you their email address.
Right.
But you could ask these in email.
Yeah, which might make it a lot more comfortable and also save you the hassle of going to see them if they're just not a good fit for you. So you might ask, how many years have you been in practice? How much experience do you have? What do you consider to be your specialty? What treatments do you think are effective in resolving, this whatever issue you're going for? Ask them if they are prescribers of medication, or if not, if they work with somebody who does. That's typically the case. If they have telehealth. One question on this list, which I think you will never get an answer to, is how soon can I expect to start feeling better? I mean, nobody's going to tell you that. They're going to be like, I don't know, as soon as you do. What do we do if our treatment plan isn't working? I also think you're probably not going to get an answer to that, but you can try. I think it's worth asking.
Yeah, I kind of really like that question, though. I don't think, I think it's a great question.
Yeah.
I think to hear how they would answer it, to hear how they would say, well, in my experience, when it hasn't worked, this is what we've tried, or this is what we've done, or this is how I've approached it. I find that fascinating. I would love to know what they would say.
Yeah,
Like,
I think it turns on your research brain too.
yeah, well, probably.
Yeah. But no,
But
I think it's a great question. I agree with you.
and I think it would give you an insight into their personality and to their
Yeah.
approach.
Well, yeah, so the more I think about it, the more I'm like, well, if they refuse to answer it, is it an indicator that that's not a good fit, right?
Right. Is it an indicator that they do it one way and that's it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And then, and if you hit a wall, then that's it and you've wasted your time.
Right.
Because, so
Might be a red flag.
might be a red flag, which we'll get to. So let's say you find a couple therapists. And I say if you find a couple, you reach out to all of them, right? Because you don't know what's going to work. You don't know who's going to get back to you and say, I'm sorry, we're full. I'm sorry, I'm not taking any new patients. Oh, you're only available on Thursdays at 8 p.m. Or can you meet me at 3 a.m., in Neptune, California? Nope, sorry.
Right.
So reaching out to the therapist the first time can be daunting. A lot of those directories allow you to do it through portals. So you can introduce yourself, say, hi, I'm Tova. This is why I'm looking for a therapist. Maybe explain your concerns, big picture, your goals, maybe ask some of those initial questions. It's a way to just kind of get your foot in the door, get some brief questions, some communication. They're not going to give you a lot of information as a response. Generally, I've had people call me back and I just want to be like, can you just text me back? But they never do. They always call. It's annoying.
Yeah.
But at least, they do call you back and they let you know what's going on.
Right.
And if they have openings. Now I saw recommendations of doing a phone screen. I have never had this. I have always just had the first appointment. So I don't know how normal doing a phone screen is.
So I've done a lot of phone screens when seeking therapists for my kid.
Okay.
And I think it worked really well because there were several people where I was like, oh, this is not going to go well. There's no point in us even coming to see you. And then there's other people where I'm like, well, maybe we'll see. So you can get, as much as I hate talking on the phone, and everyone who knows me knows I really hate talking on the phone, you can get a good sense of somebody's energy, their vibe, their intensity, their
Yeah.
perspective from just a short phone conversation. So I do encourage it. I think I might, when I inevitably wind up going back to therapy, I might put this into practice for myself because I was surprised at how much information I got just from that, like from a 10-minute phone call.
I like it. I like it. And if not, you may do one session, but you can make it more about them. And I always forget that. I'm just like, oh, what do you want to know? Here, let me dump everything that's happening
Like,
in my
here's
life.
my whole life story.
So, how do you know if it's a good fit? It's like pornography. You know it if you see it. No, I
don't think you're wrong.
don't think
You know
I'm
it if
wrong
you
with
feel
it.
it is
You
really
know it
what
if you
happens.
feel it. So that being said, let's discuss red flags.
Yeah.
Because, they do suggest everything I read says give it a couple times. That being said, if you have a red flag, trust your gut.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes when you're in a dark place, you don't trust your gut. So find that accountability partner and share your experience and trust their gut, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it is okay to borrow someone else's gut for a while until you can trust your own again.
Just a little rental. It's
Yeah.
fine.
So like, does the room that you're in make you feel physically uncomfortable? You're right. That's red flag if it doesn't. Are you experiencing overwhelming feelings of anger or of anxiety or panic? Right now, there's like oh, I'm anxious because I'm talking to somebody new. I'm a little nervous. This is a little stressful. I don't like sharing my feelings.
Yeah.
Okay, that's normal. Is it overwhelming panic? That is, you should not be feeling that with a therapist. Because they're part of their job is to make you feel comfortable.
Right. Like that's their baseline job.
Yeah. Do you feel comfortable telling them anything? Now, I don't think that is normal for you to feel necessarily in the first session.
It's probably not going to happen in the first like 10 sessions, to be honest.
But also you shouldn't be feeling judged at any point.
Yeah. And I know we need to wrap up, but I had a therapist once who, and this was one of the ones I was talking about before that I first went to. And while I was in a very defensive place to begin with, so some of it was on me, this woman made me feel so terrible about myself that like everything I said was wrong. Everything I did was wrong. I felt so judged and terrible. And I kept going to see her because I was like, well, clearly I'm doing something wrong. And this woman's going to fix it for me. And so just be aware of that reaction to feeling judged or to feeling like they're telling you you're wrong or you're not good or you're whatever. If you have that reaction of like, oh well, I'm going to keep going and they're going to approve of me, um that's a pretty big red flag. That's your
Yeah.
gut telling you this is a bad idea.
Yeah. Yeah. Is your therapist completely present with you throughout your session? I think that's an interesting one. Just like, are they listening to me?
Yeah, are they looking at the clock every 5 minutes?
Yeah.
Are they on their phone? God help them.
Yeah.
None of those things should be happening.
Your therapist should not specialize in everything. I give them a pass if on like Psychology Today, they have like everything checked because I think that just like catches everything. But when you actually ask them what you specialize in,
Yeah.
they should not say everything.
Yeah.
Um, a good share, like, let's see, what are we looking for? Oh, no therapist should say they can cure you.
No.
I wish they could. I keep waiting for that to happen.
We
but
all wish we could push that button for ourselves.
apparently they can't. If they have inappropriate boundaries. So I did not know my therapist had, I don't know if my therapist is married. I do know my therapist has a kid. I do not know how many. I do not know what age, although I think they're older. I do not know what gender. And I have been seeing my therapist for 6 years.
Yeah.
I do know they have a dog because they worked from home and the dog would come into the room once in a while, like during the pandemic.
Yeah. I mean,
otherwise I would not know that my therapist had a dog.
Right.
Like,
it's not a friendship.
it is not a friendship.
A big red flag. If you feel like you're becoming friends with your therapist, then they're not your therapist anymore. Maybe you're going to be great friends and that's awesome, but they should no longer be your therapist. And they know that. That is part of their ethics training. And also, like, you should not feel like you are the therapist for your therapist, right?
Yeah.
Like, it should never be the case where you're hearing about their problems or what's going on with them or why they're 15 minutes late or whatever is happening. That is not your problem to solve. Like I said earlier, most therapists have therapists and they should be using them. And so that's a big red flag. And I know it happens a lot in a lot of therapy relationships.
So here's the thing. You should always feel good, not necessarily pleasant, but good around your therapist. They are going to challenge you to confront difficult truths, difficult emotions. They might leave you with difficult emotions. You may feel worse after you leave than when you got there, but you should feel safe and supported and comfortable.
Right.
If you don't, they're not the right therapist for you.
Right.
If you feel bad, like I said, you might feel worse than when you got there in the sense that you feel, oh my gosh, all of these emotions are being dug up and I'm being pushed to look at things that I didn't want to look at.
Therapy is uncomfortable.
You're
going to experience quite a bit of discomfort, but it should be internal discomfort. It should be like about your situation, not about the therapist.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you have, like I said, if you have a bad gut feeling, I am 100% for trusting your gut feelings.
Mm-hmm.
I also recognize that a lot of times we don't feel like we can trust it anymore. And that is really good information to know about yourself. That's important to know. Yep. And that is when it is really important to have an accountability partner where you can, chat with your accountability partner about, hey, what do you think about this? And I mean, there have been times I know there are certain situations in my life right now. I mean, I trust my gut in many, many situations. There are times right now I still don't trust my gut in some. And I mean, within the last month, I said to a friend, I knew there was a red flag. I didn't know what it was, but I knew there was one. Because she's like, yeah, no, it was this. I was like, nice. I at least I spotted a red flag.
Right.
So, really, really fast, we're gonna wrap it up. Finances. We've been talking about this for a while. Um, when we said most of everything, I just want to kind of wrap it up at the very end. Insurance does cover a lot. I think it is really helpful, especially if you work for a company of any like size, more than 5 people. But to figure out, does your company offer mental health benefits beyond just what the insurance offers? Because there may be additional mental health benefits that the corporation offers in addition to the insurance. There also may be programs that the insurance company offers internally somehow. I never understand how any of this works, that in addition to their like covering of mental health, like I could call Cigna and say, hey, and they'd be like, yes, you get 5, sessions with these people, but they're
Right.
different than like what they pay through their coverage. And you had mentioned that.
Yeah.
There are other things to do. So there's teletherapy. So there's BetterHelp and there's Talkspace. Those are the big ones.
Mm-hmm.
For the most part, those are not covered yet by insurance, but a lot of corporations have like
A relationship,
relationships
an
with
agreement
them.
with them. Yeah.
Yeah, so that they're less expensive for you.
Mm-hmm.
Online therapy is awesome. Make sure that whatever you're doing, wherever you're working with, that they are licensed. Um, because there are some shady, snake oil salesmen out there that are trying to set up online shops that they're not licensed.
Yeah.
So make sure you're working with an online, the same questions. Are you licensed? Blah, 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 all those things.
Yeah.
Um, if you can't find variety of things, group therapy might be an interesting place to start. All those same organizations, churches, all the same places we mentioned at the beginning may offer group therapy depending on what you need it for.
Yep.
A number of therapists offer sliding scale options. So maybe they don't take insurance, but they may take sliding scale based on your income. There can also be federal funded and community funded programs through health centers. So if you are feeling a financial pinch, recognize that if you qualify for, well, first of all, recognize that there is a lot between I don't have to worry about money because I have so much of it and food stamps, right? There's a lot of middle ground and there's a lot of community funded help that local organizations, and you might call your local community food bank and say, hey,
Yeah.
can you recommend any organizations that provide mental health services? And you may qualify for it. Depending if you live in a high cost of living area, you can make a decent amount of money and still, especially if you have kids, and still qualify for some reduced price mental health services.
Yeah. Other places to look to, just as a side note, are the typically states, and then counties, if you have counties, will have programs to help people with mental health crisis, like if you are in
Yes.
crisis. And there are hotlines, of course, that you can call, and emergency services that can assist in interventions when it's warranted.
Yep. Yep. The crisis hotlines can be incredibly helpful.
Yeah.
And we did not talk about, but the suicide hotlines that are available are also incredibly helpful, and you can call those as many times as you need to.
Yep.
Lastly, if you live near a college or university and you don't mind if the person is younger than you, you may be able to see someone who is being trained. Keep in mind that they are being supervised. So it's not like you're seeing somebody who isn't, having someone review their notes and that kind of thing.
Right.
So there are options. It does take legwork. This is where we recommend finding an accountability partner. So, that was a lot of how-tos. It was a lot of information, but we have been telling you for the last 3+ years to go to therapy.
Yeah.
And we thought it was really important that we told you how.
It occurred to us finally that maybe people would want that bit of advice.
Yeah. So here's some homework for you. If you're already seeing a therapist, woohoo. What I would love for you to do is go back through that list of things that you should ask yourself. Do you care about the like pretend you aren't seeing a therapist, right? Check the communication styles. Does your communication style with your therapist work for you? If it doesn't, think about what you would like to see and bring that up with them. Do you feel like you are, hitting your goals? Have you recently had a conversation about your goals? If not, bring that up with them. Go through those kinds of things with your current therapist.
Yeah.
If you are actively looking for a therapist, we have given you a plan. Find an accountability partner. I think it is the most important first step. And then, assuming you have insurance, I would say that is your first step. Reach out to your insurance company and find what your options are through your insurance company, and then start going through like the databases to find, what your options are. If you are not actively looking for a therapist, I would say you maybe don't need an accountability partner yet, but go to your insurance company and find what are your options? What are your mental health options? Like, learn what your company offers. If you're getting your insurance through your partner, learn what their options are. And just learn, because there are so many things now that are available. Maybe learn what your community offers and just get a better understanding of what is around you so that you are prepared when you need it and you're ready to go. Almost like an emergency list.
Yeah. No, I
so
think
that
that's a great idea.
You're ready.
Yeah. I think that does it for today. So, hopefully all that information was super helpful. If you guys have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. If you need a support system, we have our weekly women's group, which is a great place to find that accountability partner, find people who will help you sort of figure out what the next steps are. And we would love to have you. You can find out more about it on our website at goboldlyinitiative.com or on our social media at Go Boldly Together. So we would love to hear from you. And we will be back next week with another how-to to help you live your limitless life. We will talk to you then, everyone.
Thanks so much for listening to We Go Boldly podcast. We know you're busy and we love spending time with you.
If you enjoyed this week's episode, let us know. Head to Apple Podcasts right now to rate and review our show. While you're there, be sure to click that subscribe button.
Want more us time? Follow us on all the socials at Go Boldly Together.
Want even more us time? As in all the coaching pizzazz. Find us at goboldlyinitiative.com for all the info.
We will be back with more excitement, research, and deep thoughts next week.
Until then, keep on being the bold, brave, amazing people we know you already are.